The night was thick with fog, curling through the alleys of the old quarter like fingers searching for something to touch. Streetlights flickered, casting long, uneasy shadows over cracked pavement and rusting iron gates. At the edge of the neighborhood, past the boarded-up shops and abandoned townhouses, stood a mansion that had been deserted for decades. Its windows were shattered or blackened with grime, and the front door sagged slightly on its hinges, whispering secrets of the past every time the wind pressed against it. Armand stood across the street, his camera bag slung over one shoulder, his breath forming tiny clouds in the cold February air. He was 24 lean with sharp eyes that darted constantly, betraying the nervous energy pulsing through him. He had spent weeks planning this night, studying old property records, interviewing neighbors, reading every news article about the mansion. The locals called it the Devendra Raaz house. The name alone carried weight in hushed conversations. Devendra Raaz had been a renowned writer, famous for his haunting novels, each one darker than the last, and for the mysterious circumstances surrounding his disappearance 20 years ago. Armand's fingers tightened around the strap of his camera bag. "Okay," he muttered under his breath. "This is it, no turning back now." He stepped off the curb, his sneakers crunching gravel as he approached the mansion. The closer he got, the more oppressive the air became, almost viscous, pressing against his chest. The wind picked up, whistling through the broken windows and rustling the dead leaves scattered across the cracked stone pathway. As he reached the front door, he noticed a strange chill in the air, one that seemed unnatural. It wasn't just cold, it was as if the house itself were aware of his presence, sizing him up. "Haunted or not," he whispered, gripping the camera in his hands, "I'm about to find out." He pushed the door, it creaked loudly, echoing into the darkness beyond. Inside, the air was musty, thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, illuminating a grand staircase at the center of the entry hall. Its once polished wood was dull and splintered, and the railing had been gnawed away in places by time or neglect. On the walls hung faded portraits of people long dead, their eyes staring with lifeless intensity, their faces frozen in expressions that didn't quite match the smiles they wore in life. Armand's camera swung to capture everything: the hall, the staircase, the portraits. He whispered to the lens, "I'm inside. This is unbelievable." As he stepped further in, the floorboards groaned under his weight. Each step echoed like a warning. The mansion felt alive and yet utterly abandoned at the same time. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance, or the flapping of a curtain in a cracked window. He moved cautiously toward the staircase, his flashlight cutting swaths through the darkness. Halfway up, he froze at the top of the stairs. In the faint moonlight stood a painting unlike the others. It depicted a woman in a white dress, standing in a misty forest. Her hair was dark and long, cascading down her back, and her eyes, though painted, seemed almost alive, watching him as if she knew he was there. A shiver ran down his spine. "Probably just my imagination," he muttered, shaking his head. But even as he said it, the feeling of being watched intensified. He continued upward, each step more deliberate than the last. At the landing, a hallway stretched to either side, lined with closed doors. He tried one, locked. Another, also locked. Finally, he reached a door slightly ajar. At the end of the hall, inside, dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight. A desk sat against the far wall, cluttered with papers yellowed with age. A single leather-bound diary lay atop the papers, its cover cracked but well preserved. Armand's heart rate quickened. He knelt beside the desk and opened the diary. The first page was blank, but the second bore a single line, written in neat, almost obsessive handwriting. "This story is not meant to be read lightly. It has a life of its own." He swallowed hard. "Okay, this is getting creepy." He raised the camera to record. "I'm holding a diary that belonged to Devendra Raaz. No idea if it's cursed or whatever, but..." A sudden noise made him freeze. A faint whisper, almost inaudible, came from the far corner of the room. He spun around, flashlight sweeping the room. But there was nothing, just the desk, the chair, the dusty floor. He laughed nervously, shaking his head. I need to stop reading horror stories before I do this. Returning his attention to the diary, he flipped a page. The next entry was chilling in its detail. I have written a story that will outlive me. It requires a witness, someone who will carry it into the world. But every story has a price, and I wonder if the price is too high to pay. Armand felt a cold hand of dread wrap around him. A witness, that's me, he joked. But the sound of his own voice felt hollow in the room. The air in the room grew colder. His breath misted as he read the following entry. If you are reading this, then you are already part of the story. Do not ignore the signs, look closely. Watch closely, some things cannot be unseen. Armand's hand trembled slightly as he closed the diary. He looked around, suddenly feeling as though the walls themselves were leaning in. Pressing against him, the portraits outside the room seemed to be more vivid. More lifelike than before. The woman in white, was she watching him now? A sudden noise, a floorboard creaking above him, made him jump. He raised the camera, flashlight cutting upward. But the upstairs hallway was empty. The silence returned, but it felt heavier now, suffocating in a way that made his chest tighten. All right, he whispered, trying to steady his shaking hands. Maybe I should get this over with. Document, get the footage, get out. As he turned to leave, he noticed something strange in the reflection of a cracked mirror on the wall. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a shadow move behind him, tall, human-shaped yet impossibly still. He spun around, but there was nothing. He stepped into the hallway again, flashlight beam sweeping the doors. One door at the far end, previously closed, was now slightly open. He didn't remember opening it. The diary had been the last thing on his mind. But something, curiosity, perhaps foolish bravery, drew him toward the room. Inside, the air smelled different, older, heavier, with the faint metallic tang of something decayed. The walls were lined with shelves of books, stacked haphazardly, many falling apart with age. But on the far wall, above a small writing desk, hung a portrait that made him freeze. It was the same woman from before, the one in the misty forest, but this time her eyes seemed impossibly alive, following him, watching. Armand swallowed hard, his throat dry. Okay, that's enough, he said, backing toward the door. But before he could leave, a sudden sound, a whispering sigh, almost like words carried on the wind, drifted across the room. It said one word, soft but unmistakable. Armand. His stomach dropped. The diary. The entry, the warning, his name. Written nowhere else, yet somehow spoken here in this room, like the house itself knew him. He spun, flashlight scanning every corner. But nothing moved, no one was there. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if it were right behind him. Armand. He bolted back down the hallway, past the study toward the staircase. Each step of the old wood groaned beneath him. The air grew heavier, colder, until he could barely breathe. At the base of the stairs, he stumbled, hitting the floor with a thud. His camera clattered beside him, still recording, and that's when he saw her, the woman from the portraits, standing at the top of the stairs. Draped in white, her hair flowing like black water. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears, yet piercing, impossible to look away from. Why are you here? Armand managed to gasp, scrambling backward. She tilted her head slightly, a small, sorrowful smile on her lips. Because you came, she whispered. Her voice was like silk and smoke. You've come to finish the story. The floorboards trembled beneath her, the air shivering with her presence. And in that moment, Armand realized he had crossed a threshold. He had stepped into a story that wasn't just written to be read. It was written to live, and now it had found him. The diary on the desk trembled. Flipping open by itself, the pages rustled in the heavy silence. words forming on their own, shaping a story that Armand had no choice but to read. And as he bent over it, the woman's gaze never leaving him. A voice inside his head whispered, "The story has begun, and there is no turning back." Armand's hands trembled as he stared at the diary, its pages flipping rapidly as though an invisible hand were impatient to tell its story. He could hear his own heartbeat, thudding in his ears like a drum, each beat echoing in the cavernous, shadowed mansion. The woman in white, Meera, as she had whispered, stood at the top of the stairs, unmoving yet somehow drawing every ounce of his attention. The words on the page were no longer just ink. They shimmered faintly as if alive. "The witness has arrived, the story awaits completion." Armand swallowed hard. His rational mind screamed that this was impossible. That diaries didn't move on their own. That portraits didn't follow people with their eyes. Yet here he was, staring at phenomena that defied explanation. And the mansion seemed to pulse with awareness. "Okay, Armand," he muttered to himself, attempting a laugh that came out as a strangled whisper. "Just get the footage, document everything. It's content, pure content." But as he raised the camera, a chill swept across the room. It wasn't from the broken windows or the drafty walls. It was something deeper, older, an intelligence within the mansion. Watching, testing him, the diary flipped to a new page, revealing words that made his stomach sink. To survive, you must choose the story over fear. To read is to participate is to live or die. Armand's pulse quickened. He glanced at Meera again. She was descending the stairs now, but silently, gracefully, like a shadow slipping across the marble. Her eyes locked on his, pleading yet filled with an indescribable sorrow. "You," he stammered. "Why me? Why now?" She paused on the second step, lifting a pale hand. "Because you were brave enough to enter. Because you are alone enough to listen. And because the story cannot complete itself without a witness." The mansion groaned, almost in approval, or maybe warning, as the air around them thickened. The shadows stretched unnaturally, moving across the walls as if alive. A faint whispering filled the room, words in a language Armand couldn't understand. Swirling around him, his camera wobbled in his grip. But he forced himself to record, documenting everything. He stepped closer to the diary, compelled by curiosity and terror. Flipping a few pages, he found sketches, rough drawings of rooms he had just passed, of the portraits he had seen, and at the very end, a chilling self-portrait, Devendra Raaz himself. Dark eyes hollow, a faint grin twisting his scarred face. And beneath the portrait, written in a trembling hand, "The writer lives in his words. Kill the witness, the story is preserved. Let the witness complete the story, the writer is undone." Armand froze. The implications were clear. The mansion, the diary, the woman, they were all part of a trap. Devendra Raaz hadn't simply disappeared. He had written himself into the mansion, into a story that demanded living participants to continue its life. Meera floated closer, her voice barely a whisper. "He is here, he is always here. And he knows you are reading." A sudden crash above them made Armand jump. Something heavy fell in the hallway upstairs. He aimed his flashlight upward, but all he could see was darkness. Then a slow, deliberate echo of footsteps descended toward them. Not fast, not hurried, but heavy, menacing, alive. I have to see," he muttered. "I have to know." Meera's hand shot out, stopping him. "No, don't look directly, don't acknowledge him fully." But it was too late. The shadow emerged at the top of the stairs. Tall, menacing, the outline of a man unmistakable, even in the flickering light. Armand's stomach sank. Devendra Raaz, alive in some impossible way, stepping out from the pages of the diary. Skin pale and taut, eyes black pits. Clothes old-fashioned and torn as though pulled from another century. "Armand," the figure growled, voice echoing unnaturally. "You dare read my work?" Armand stumbled backward, camera shaking. I didn't mean." "You are the witness," Devendra hissed. "And witnesses must complete the story or become its sacrifice." The walls of the room seemed to breathe. closing in, shadows writhing as if animated by the writer's presence. Meera clutched at Armand's arm. "You have a choice," she whispered. "Destroy the diary and risk the story unfinished. Or read it and risk your life." Armand's mind raced, the rational part of him screamed to run. To flee, to smash the diary and escape. But something, a mix of fascination, fear and ambition, kept him rooted. He lifted the diary, hands shaking violently. Pages flipped rapidly, words appearing in real time. The witness chooses, the witness acts, the witness lives or dies. The mansion shivered, the ceiling groaning as if responding to the written word. Devendra's form grew more solid. More threatening, decide, witness. Armand took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He flipped to a section marked in bold, the Atonement chapter. The words on the page seemed to pulse. The writer trapped his love in the story. The witness can free her or doom her, choose wisely. Meera's eyes met his. "Free me," she whispered, "please." Armand swallowed, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Slowly, deliberately, he read the words aloud, voice trembling. "I witness your story, I acknowledge its truth. I will carry it to the world." As he spoke, a wind swept through the room, extinguishing the torches, rustling papers, lifting loose pages like wings. The shadows of the mansion twisted violently. Devendra's form convulsed, a scream tearing from him that was more sound than human voice. "No," Devendra's voice rang, filled with fury and despair. "You cannot erase me." Armand continued reading, heart hammering. Meera stepped closer, her presence calming the turbulence around them. The mansion shivered, then silence. When the last words left his lips, Devendra's figure wavered, blurred, and then dissipated into the air like smoke caught in a draft. The oppressive weight lifted. Meera exhaled, her form shimmering, almost translucent, then solidifying. "Thank you," she said softly. "Eyes wet, you've given me back my life." Armand sank to the floor, exhausted. Shaking, the diary lay closed beside him. Still warm to the touch, but inert. The mansion was quiet, eerily quiet, but it felt different. Lighter, as if a great darkness had finally lifted. You're free," he said, voice hoarse. Meera smiled faintly, for now. But the story never truly ends. It only waits for the next witness. He turned off the camera and walked home, the diary tucked safely in his bag, unsure if he would ever open it again. Night turned into dawn, the sky bleeding orange and gold over the city. For a moment he allowed himself relief. But then, as he reached his apartment and set the diary on his desk, the pages flipped open by themselves. Words formed slowly, deliberately. "The witness believes it is over. But the story is only beginning." A soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached his ears. "Armand, we are still waiting." And from the corner of the room, shadows gathered, not hostile, not aggressive but aware, alive, waiting for the next word, the next reader, the next witness. Armand's hand shook, he raised the camera, pointed it toward the diary, and began recording again. Because he knew one thing with absolute certainty: once a story like this begins, there is no ending, only the next chapter. The night was thick with fog, curling through the alleys of the old quarter like fingers searching for something to touch. Streetlights flickered, casting long, uneasy shadows over cracked pavement and rusting iron gates. At the edge of the neighborhood, past the boarded-up shops and abandoned townhouses, stood a mansion deserted for decades. Its windows were shattered or blackened with grime, and the front door sagged slightly on its hinges, whispering secrets of the past every time the wind pressed against it. Armand stood across the street, camera bag slung over one shoulder, breath forming tiny clouds in the cold February air. His pulse raced and his fingers tightened around the camera strap. For weeks he had studied every news article, every property record, and every whispered tale about this place. People called it the Devendra Raaz house. Devendra Raaz, a writer whose novels were famous for their darkness, whose disappearance 20 years ago remained a mystery. Okay, Arman whispered, this is it, no turning back now. He stepped onto the cracked stone path, the gravel crunching under his sneakers. The wind pressed in, unnerving, as if the mansion itself were aware of him. He reached the front door, a push. A loud creaking groan, the door swung open, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the weak moonlight. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. Moonlight revealed a grand staircase at the center of the hall. Its polished wood was dull and splintered, the railing chewed away in places by time. Faded portraits lined the walls, eyes staring with lifeless intensity. Armand's camera swung to capture it all. I'm inside, this is unbelievable. Every floorboard groaned under his weight as he approached the stairs. Halfway up he froze at the top. A painting unlike the others, a woman in a white dress, standing in a misty forest, her hair cascaded down her back. In her eyes seemed alive, watching. Probably just my imagination, he muttered. He continued, each step deliberate. At the landing, a hallway stretched either side. Most doors were locked, but one at the end stood slightly ajar. Inside, dust motes danced in his flashlight's beam. A desk sat against the far wall, cluttered with yellowed papers. Atop them, a leather-bound diary. Armand's heart raced as he opened it. The first page blank, the second bore a line in neat, obsessive handwriting. This story is not meant to be read lightly, it has a life of its own. A whisper behind him made him freeze. The room was empty, yet he felt it, something unseen. Watching, he laughed nervously. I need to stop reading horror stories before I do this. But the diary demanded attention. It spoke of the mansion, of the writer, and of a witness, someone who would carry the story forward. And then he saw his name written on the page, Arman. The floorboards groaned, the diary flipped itself open. Pages rustling violently, and then she appeared, the woman from the portraits. White dress, long black hair, eyes wet yet piercing. Why are you here? He stammered. Because you came, she whispered. You've come to finish the story. The mansion trembled as if responding to her words. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally. Armand realized with a sinking heart he had crossed a threshold. He had stepped into a story that demanded life and participation. He stumbled backward, the diary in his hands, words shimmering across the pages. The witness chooses, the witness acts, the witness lives or dies. And then he saw him at the top of the stairs. Devendra Raaz, or what he had become. Tall, pale, eyes like black pits. Clothes torn and old-fashioned. You dare read my work, the figure growled. Armand tried to flee, but his legs felt rooted. I didn't mean. You are the witness, Devendra hissed. And witnesses must complete the story or become its sacrifice. The walls breathed, shadows writhed. And Meera clutched at his arm. You have a choice, she whispered. Destroy the diary, risk leaving the story unfinished, or read it, risk your life. Armand's mind raced. Slowly, he realized what he had to do. He flipped to a section marked, the Atonement chapter, words pulsed with life. The witness can free her or doom her, choose wisely. Meera's eyes met his. Free me, she whispered. Armand's voice trembled as he read aloud. I witness your story, I acknowledge its truth. I will carry it to the world. A wind swept through the room, extinguishing torches, lifting papers. Devendra's figure convulsed, screaming in fury and despair. Then blurred, then dissipated. The oppressive weight lifted. Meera stepped forward, her form solidifying. Thank you, she said softly. You've given me back my life. Armand sank to the floor, shaking. Exhausted, the diary lay inert. The mansion was quiet, safe for now. He walked outside, dawn spilling across the city. Relief washed over him, but back in his apartment. The diary flipped open by itself, words formed slowly. The witness believes it is over. But the story is only beginning. A soft whisper filled the room. Armand, we are still waiting. And in the corner, shadows gathered. Patient, alive, waiting for the next word. The next reader, the next witness. Armand raised his camera. He began recording again. Because one thing was certain. Once a story like this begins, there is no ending, only the next chapter.